I had the privilege of being married to my wife for a decade, and as our anniversary approached, I couldn't help but feel grateful for having found a life partner that I could spend so much time with. Our relationship had reached a level of intimacy where we knew everything about each other and we were the best of friends. Our astrological signs seemed to complement each other perfectly, which could perhaps explain our strong connection. Although I did notice that her zodiac sign was associated with infidelity, I chose to overlook it, and for 10 years, everything was smooth sailing. Our daughter was born 3 years into our marriage, and my wife had been steadily climbing the ladder in her career, receiving a significant raise just before our summer family vacation. At that moment, I felt like I had discovered true love, and that I would always be with my wife. However, on the night of her big raise, she appeared flustered and overwhelmed by the good news. There was a look of bewilderment and concern on her face that made me suspicious. When I inquired about it, she brushed it off and forced a laugh, claiming that she was simply having trouble believing her own success. Despite her reassurances, I knew that something else was going on. When I pressed her further, she insisted that everything was fine and that she was just pleasantly surprised. At that moment, the thought of my wife cheating on me had not even crossed my mind. However, she said something peculiar before retreating to our bedroom. She mentioned that her boss was incredible and that she was fortunate to have his favor. The statement caught me off guard, and it seemed as though she realized she had let something slip. The following day was our anniversary party, and as we prepared for the celebration, my wife received a call from her boss. She excused herself to take the call in her office, a common practice for her when she needed to take notes. Without her knowledge, I crept up to the door and eavesdropped on their conversation. Initially, she expressed her gratitude for the raise, but then her voice grew hushed. She whispered about how grateful she was to be able to thank him properly, how incredible he was, and how she longed to be with him again. She even inquired if there were any security cameras in his office that could potentially witness their rendezvous. After a moment of silence, my wife expressed relief that there were no cameras that could expose their affair. She emphasized the risk of being caught and fired, which painted a clear picture in my mind. Although I was tempted to storm into the room and confront her on the spot, I instead made a decision to wait and address the issue publicly at our anniversary party. I knew that I needed to take action that would force me to follow through with confronting her and ultimately divorcing her. In my mind, her confirmation of having slept with her boss in his office was now a matter of public knowledge. I stood motionless outside the door until my wife emerged, visibly anxious. I was standing so close to her that she could sense something was off, but I forced a fake smile and remained silent. As we prepared to leave for the party, I was like a zombie while she was visibly agitated. She only smoked when she was extremely stressed, and on the way there, she lit a cigarette. She attempted to inquire again about my well-being, and I could tell she wanted to know if I had overheard her conversation. When we arrived at the venue, I turned to her and suggested we celebrate our 10-year marriage together. My tone was robotic and devoid of any hint of anger, which made it clear to my wife that I had overheard her conversation. However, she was unable to bring herself to address the situation with me. As we entered the venue, she sat there sweating profusely until I got up to deliver a speech. I deliberately took my time to greet our friends and family and maintain the facade that everything was fine. Our 7-year-old daughter was also present at the party, having spent the week at my parents' house as an anniversary gift for my wife and me. However, as my wife looked around at our loved ones and daughter, she started to itch herself uncontrollably, as if going through withdrawal. Her face was red, and people actually started circling her saying she didn't look good. She swore she was fine, but people could see her skin was slick with sweat. I took this as an opportunity. I told everyone in a loud and clear voice that my wife was having an affair with her boss. Everyone gasped and my wife fainted. Since our family and friends aren't heartless, they started fanning her and got a cold cloth for her forehead. The old-fashioned thing to do. I guess when she came to, she was so ashamed she couldn't speak. She finally said she wanted to go home, and I asked her what home. She began to cry and ran to the bathroom. I expressed my gratitude to everyone for their attendance, then picked up my daughter and departed for home. Later on, my wife tried calling a few times, but I didn't hear any of it since I was asleep. Knowing that I discovered the truth in due time and took action by kicking her out made me feel content. I later found out that one of my wife's cousins allowed her to stay at their home. However, I was determined to make more changes. I emailed their company's HR department to report what had occurred. After a week had passed, I received a response from the HR department, expressing gratitude for the information and informing me that appropriate action had been taken. Following this, my wife contacted me, calling me a despicable person for ruining her and her boss's careers, which they had worked towards their whole lives. In response, I reminded her that she was the one who ruined our marriage and that I had worked tirelessly for her and our daughter for 10 years of my life. I also questioned how she could ever look up to her mother again. After this exchange, I didn't hear from her until visitation with our daughter began following our divorce. I have moved on and found a new partner who has done things for me that my ex never would have considered. However, it is bittersweet because I have come to realize that I wasted a lot of time trusting my ex. Regarding the situation with my ex-wife, I appreciate your sympathy. It was dishonorable of her to sleep with her boss as a way of thanking him for a raise, and to talk to him on the phone about it behind my back. She clearly didn't understand the gravity of her mistake and that there would be consequences. I am glad that I took the necessary steps to remove her from my life and hold her accountable for her actions. It's true that my ex-wife deserved to feel uncomfortable and sick as a result of her actions. She didn't think about how her behavior would affect not only me, but also our daughter, who looked up to her as a role model for how a woman and wife should behave. It's unfortunate, but I'm grateful that I now have a second chance to live my life with a better and more trustworthy partner. Thank you for your well wishes, and let's move on to the second story. My wife, who is 35 years old and had been working as a college professor for a few years, is the subject of the second story. My wife had put in a lot of effort over the course of several years to secure her job as a college professor, and it was something that she was rightfully proud of. Her parents shared in her joy, and we all celebrated with a big graduation and new job party. In fact, we even postponed our wedding at her request so that she could pursue her dream job. I couldn't imagine her doing anything that would put her job or our future together at risk. However, things didn't go according to plan, and I wouldn't be here today if they had. She became close friends with some of her students. Her close friends were in their late 20s, which meant they were close enough in age to my wife. However, I couldn't help but feel a little uneasy about her being friends with her own students, given that she was their professor. It didn't seem like a very professional decision to me, but I kept my thoughts to myself. In fact, she even attended some of the parties that they hosted. From what she told me, it was more like a group get-together and not as wild as a typical party. She mentioned that they even discussed some of the lesson topics with her, as her students were passionate and focused on their studies. I regret not having spoken up about my concerns. I should have urged her to stop mixing her dream job with pleasure, but seeing her so happy and feeling like she was making a difference in her students' lives made it difficult for me to do so. She always made sure to come home at a reasonable time because she didn't want to leave me alone all night. In fact, she didn't go out more than twice a month. However, I knew something was amiss when she stayed out until 2 a.m. I was wide awake, waiting for her return, and we ended up having an argument. She insisted that she was only helping her students, but I found this to be unacceptable. I insisted on getting to the bottom of the situation, but she refused to provide any new information. When I suggested that she refrain from socializing with students for a while, she became extremely agitated. She accused me of being controlling and broke down in tears. She argued that as a responsible adult, she should be able to live her life freely, especially now that she had found someone who made her so happy. I was taken aback by her response. She quickly backtracked and claimed that she had misspoken because she was tired and felt attacked. Although I was concerned by her slip of the tongue, I didn't have the energy to argue any further that evening. I didn't feel comfortable asking her to take time off work either, and I wasn't sure how or when I should broach the subject again. I knew I should, but I decided to wait and see what she would do next. Fortunately, things quieted down. She didn't go out and only went to work before returning home. It was a relief, but she still had to grade papers at home, so I gave her space to focus. However, one day I walked in on her texting someone, and it startled her. I found it strange, but I didn't say anything. Later, I considered checking her phone, but it was passcode protected. I made a plan to create an opportunity for her to bring students to the house while I secretly kept an eye on things. I needed to find out who these individuals were and whether anything suspicious was going on. Surprisingly, she fell for it quite easily. When I mentioned that I was going to spend an evening with my mother at the nursing home, she was thrilled. She praised me for being so thoughtful and even offered to give me a ride, then pick me up later to throw me off her trail. I agreed to her offer and headed back to the house, which took me about 20 minutes. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I couldn't imagine my wife doing anything dishonorable. A few times, I even convinced myself that I was being paranoid and started heading back to my mother's nursing home, only to turn back around again. When I arrived, I noticed a different car parked outside her house. I realized that she probably assumed she had plenty of time to do as she pleased before coming to pick me up. The sight of the unfamiliar car only heightened my suspicions, and I ran to the front door with trembling hands. I fumbled with the lock and eventually managed to open it, only to be confronted with the most disturbing sight I had ever seen. My wife was having sex with her student before either of them put their pants on. I took a picture. It's a high-tech world now. I took my phone out when I saw the mystery car so I'd be prepared to take a picture of whatever my wife was up to. If it was all good, I would have been the crazy one. But now she was. It all started to hit me after she got her pants on and her student ran outside. She started yelling God knows what while my head started pounding. I could only hear my heartbeat as I thought about how our marriage was over and the future I expected to have with her was a false hope. My wife's career was completely destroyed. She would never be able to teach at that school again. And any future school she applied to would surely ask why she had been fired from her previous job. I tried to gather my thoughts and demanded to know why she would risk everything she had worked so hard for, all for one of her former students. She stared at me blankly before finally saying that he had asked her to hang out, and she didn't think anything bad would happen. I lost my temper and began yelling, telling her that something terrible had indeed happened. She had brought him into our home and engaged in sexual activity with him. She began gesturing rudely at me while screaming that the mishap was not her fault and that I had prevented them from completing the task, so it should not count against her. I was stunned. Her reasoning was so flawed that I found it difficult to argue with her. I decided to pack my bags and check into a hotel room, as I did not wish to continue arguing with her that night about who should leave. It felt as though I was dealing with a spoiled child who believed that their past accomplishments would excuse their behavior. I was not going to stick around and allow her to keep her job either. After filing for divorce, I took the picture and sent it to the president of the college. As I had suspected, she was terminated from her job. Our future interactions were filled with her intense dislike towards me, and she could not even look me in the eye. I never saw her eyes again. Her once confident, flawless, and highly accomplished demeanor was replaced with one of shame and disgrace. Even her parents were shocked and asked me to send them the picture, which I did reluctantly. They apologized to me for their daughter's behavior. However, I later found out that my wife was not employed by any colleges in the state. After a few years had passed, she relocated to another state, likely because she was unable to secure a job despite numerous applications. I have resumed dating, but I have become more cautious about believing that I understand someone's character or that they will always be trustworthy. To the original poster, I am deeply sorry for the betrayal you experienced when your wife brought one of her students to your home and engaged in a sexual relationship with him. It is a reprehensible act, and I can only imagine how shocked you must have been, particularly given how much effort and joy she had put into obtaining this job. It is disappointing that she did not make the honorable choice to avoid jeopardizing both her marriage and career. However, I commend you for recognizing when it was time to leave, filing for divorce, and presenting evidence of her actions to the college president. Despite having ample support and a promising future, she threw it all away by succumbing to temptation with one of her students early in her teaching career. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Take care.